For our glasses frame, I'm feeling kind of a tortoise shell material. So let me open up a new reference image called CC0 glasses tortoise shell, and we'll take a look at that. One of the first things you'll see is that there is a variety of the tortoiseshell pattern, but generally speaking, it's a transparent refractive material with a range of colors from clear to a yellow to a dark brown, almost like a bourbon. And the pattern of these colors is very friendly to the procedural options we have in Blender. There's 2 textures specifically that will work for this, and I have full confidence you're thinking about them in your head. So this is actually a really fun material to put together. It's pretty straightforward. Let's get to it. So this glasses object has a slot 1 material, or rather it's just an open slot right now. It needs a material. Let's click new material and call it glasses underscore frame. In case you need a refresher, the slot 1 of any object is going to assign the material to any part of the mesh, unless specifically which slot 2 is assigned to the lenses. So glasses frame will go to our frame part of the mesh. I say refresher because we set that up a long time ago when we built the model. And we will return to our trusty principled BSDF material using a texture, Musgrave texture. That's the first texture that's going to work really well for this material, or the tortoise shell pattern specifically. Control T to bring up our texture coordinate. We don't need the mapping node. We will use our object coordinates. Switch to rendered viewport mode and shift control click on the Musgrave. Looks like the scale is way too broad. So let's take it up in value, down in frequency. Let's try 20. Let's try 50. There we go. You can clearly see where this is going. And there's a variety of frequencies in the pattern. This one in the middle seems more broad, sort of like what we have, maybe a little bit higher, like 70. But some of the patterns also get pretty fine. Like, let's try 150. That looks more like this one up top. And then as far as the other settings, let's try a detail level of 10. That doesn't really change much. And, you know, I don't think I want to change anything else, actually. This is one of the rare instances where Musgrave, like, default settings is basically perfect, aside from establishing the right scale. And from here, let's add converter color ramp. And here we can set those colors we see in the reference from a dark brown up to yellow and then white. Now this set of glasses is more brown to yellow, but most tortoiseshell has that kind of clear right here, then over to yellow, and then to the dark brown. So it's up to you how you want to set it up. But I'm going to make the dark flag kind of a reddish brown. Maybe bring up the value a bit more. And then white at the top is fine. Control left click to add a new flag, and I'll make this more of a yellow. And then we're going to see a pretty big jump from the raw color data to the final material, which we will plug the color into the base color of the principled BSDF, and then we will turn the transmission all the way to 1. Shift control click on this. And so yeah, even though our colors were fairly bright, it's dark right away once we plug it into transmission. Or rather, once we see the transmission working alongside the base color input. And so we'll need to modify these colors accordingly. But the effect is working really well. We just need to adjust our color flags. Let's try a B-spline interpolation. And we'll bring the dark flag down and the bright flags down as well, kind of crushing these flags towards that into the spectrum. And maybe my dark brown is a little too dark by itself. Let's crank that up in value. Let's look from the front view, go back to frame 1. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. Still, maybe the dark flag could be brought up a little bit. But I think we're pretty close to the reference. Now we can also use a noise texture. So let's just test that out. Texture noise. We'll also use the object coordinates. We'll probably need to adjust the scale similarly. So let's jump it up to like 50 right out of the gate. I will duplicate the color ramp because I want to use the same color values, but I'll probably have to move the color flags around differently. Let's shift control click on that. Yeah, okay, so the white flags are kind of dominating currently. All right, let's see what this looks like plugged into the base color. It's a little bit undefined, isn't it? Let's duplicate a color ramp, reset it, and then dial in our noise texture by itself. Yeah, so that needs a lot of work. Let's just try and crush the values first. And then maybe bring up the scale to like 80. You know, I don't want to increase the detail level very much. Maybe up to like 5, but I don't want to go to 10, and even 5 seems a little bit too high. You know, this tortoise shell is not very broken up. It's pretty blurry in terms of its pattern, but I do think distortion would be nice to increase. Let's go 0.5. Yeah. Yeah, kind of that swirly feeling. Okay, so now the noise texture is set up better. Let's look at the color ramp once again. Let's kind of crush these values, sort of in the same range as the temporary color ramp down there. See what it looks like in the principled BSDF. And, you know, I think part of the problem, why it looks so washed out, is our specular roughness is at 0.5. We want to take that down to like 0.2. We want it to be a lot clearer. And right away, our colors get more vibrant. They get more clear. And maybe specular amount can be taken down to like maybe 0.2, maybe even 0.1. With plastics, it's very common to bring the specular down. 0.5 is often too high. So you'll see me kind of default to 0.1, 0.2. I'm having deja vu. I feel like I've said that before in this course at least once. All right, let's crush the values a little bit more, bring down the whites. It's a little heavy on the browns. Ooh, that's looking pretty good. Yeah, that is starting to feel like the tortoise shell, in my opinion. Especially these two, up in the upper left and over here. Yeah, I like the way that feels. Let's do a proper render, maybe from this 3/4 view. All right. That's not looking too bad. It's definitely more on the underdefined side of the tortoiseshell spectrum, so it might be worth doing a second version a little more defined. Let's go down to slot 6 and either crank on the contrast of our color ramp, maybe increase the scale value as well, 120. Okay, yeah, that's a lot more defined. Looked maybe a little too clear in the bright spots. What about the Musgrave? Maybe we should just go back to that. Well, honestly, I don't think I can go wrong with either of these options. So I'll render this one for kicks. Let's see the before and after. Yeah, I mean, I like them both. Maybe I should do one with the Musgrave just to have a full platter of options to choose from. Let's see our full set of choices. This is Musgrave, Noise 1, Noise 2. I kind of think the Musgrave is my favorite, actually. What do you think? Musgrave? You agree with that? All right, then. We'll go with Musgrave. And if it doesn't look good in the end, that's going to be your fault. All right, so the last component I want to add, similar to the lenses, I want to break up the pristine, perfectly uniform reflections on the glass's frame. And we will do that partly with a noise, but also with a pointiness component within the geometry node. All right, so we'll switch to slot 1, enable viewport rendering, and let's first add that noise component. Might as well grab it from this noise texture we're not using. I think I'll leave these nodes here just in case I want to try the noise in the future, in case I start to doubt your judgment. Shift-Control-D will duplicate those. Reset the color ramp. And this time we will use a high detail of 10, roughness, let's say 0.7, and then the scale can go down. Let's try 50. Increase contrast. Let's use B-spline. Maybe go back up in scale to like 80. Yeah, that should work out fine. The distortion is a little too high. How about 0.2? Okay, this should work out fine. Not quite as granular or, dusty as the lens, but a similar idea. We just need to plug this into the roughness. Now let's see if we can find a place where we see the reflections clearly and how they are broken up. Yeah, okay. It's definitely working well up here. I think the values are a little too strong. But before I adjust those, let's add that geometry node. Shift-A, input geometry. I cannot remember if we've used the pointiness yet. I think we did when we baked the utility textures for the skin pores. So you should be familiar. Shift Control click all the way to the bottom, pointiness. We need another color ramp because the default value is always very subtle. We need to crush these values. We'll use the ease interpolation. And now we can see what we're doing with the pointiness attribute. We're highlighting the edges and darkening the crevices. So when you think about how this will affect the roughness, remember lighter values look dull, darker values look more clear. I want the crevices to be more clear and the edges to be more dull, because when handling any kind of hard surface object, the edges are going to be worn more than any other surface. So worn equals dull. So let's increase contrast just a little bit more so the majority of the surface is dark, right? Specifically, the value I want is, let's say 0.1 probably. Yeah, that's going to make sense when it comes to plastic. So let's change that to 0.1. And the upper flag will leave high like that. Well, actually, maybe I shouldn't change this to 0.1. Just leave it dark and take the flag back down to kind of, ballpark that 0.1 value. Somewhere in there. Yeah, so I kind of just reverted what I suggested. That's all right, it happens. And now we can add a color mix RGB to multiply our noise texture over the geometry. Or maybe not multiply. What if we do an overlay to just sort of exaggerate the underlying values? Yeah, that's probably going to work out well. That's plugged into roughness. Let's see what that looks like in the final shader. What I'm looking for is, again, duller surface on the edges, shinier surface in the crevices. Practically speaking, I really just want to see a breakup on the surface. I don't want it to be uniform reflections. And maybe the amount of specular reflections is a little high. How about we go to 0.05 instead of 0.1? And then let me crank the contrast of the pointiness color ramp. I really want to see a strong effect of how it's, kind of dulling the edges. Okay, now we can see more effect, definitely. But I don't want them to look beaten either. This is a subtle game. It's probably going to be most valuable if I just do a render and compare to the previous version. Yeah, the viewport's just not quite fast enough, so let's kick off a render. Okay, what do we have? Yes, we can see a difference. This is before uniform reflections, and this is after. Hopefully you can tell that it is a duller reflection on the edges, as per the pointiness node. But I also understand if it's a little subtle to tell in a still frame. Just like the lenses, making the reflections imperfect is most noticeable in animation. And so to show you what I mean, I've got the sequence loaded from the end of the teaser video. And right here, notice the breakup on the side of the frame. The reflections start to creep up the edges faster because they're dull. And then on the broad flat side, you can see evidence of the noise pattern that's giving variety to the reflections. But honestly, that's where the effect is most noticeable out of any of my renders. So it might seem inconsequential or really subtle, but right there, I'd say it's totally worth it. So that is going to do it for our glasses materials, at least for setting up the first version. I feel like I say this after every video, but I fully expect to come back and tweak numerous things to perfect each render. And like something I'm keeping in mind is the fact that the dust is maybe a little too white or a little too prominent. I like that it's there, but it doesn't need to be white. It could be slightly darker, slightly more in the brownish direction. And the reflections, the more renders I see, I start to wonder if they're a little too strong on the lenses. But these are all the little things I keep in mind and will likely adjust to perfection. in the final rendering stage.